Do you think it's like cooking a steak at some point?
Yeah, why not? If you think about, at the end of the day, you have pick and place and simple manipulation. That's what cooking is. They're just like a much higher degree of reliability. And there's other things around food safety and bacteria and other things that come in cooking and temperature sensing and what like that. So it's all doable. It's just like,
I would think at some point it's like, hey, robot, I'm at work right now. There's a steak in the fridge. Please cook it and clean up everything. By the time I'm like 15 years from now, that's doable.
Less than 5.
Less than 5?
Yeah.
All right. I'm really pumped to be here with Kyle Vogt. Kyle, thanks a ton for making time for this.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with talking about like why robotics seems to be having such a moment. You know, it's obviously been really important for a long time, but in the last few years, it seems like a lot of really good entrepreneurs, a lot of good investors have started to pour a bunch of time, money, resources, and effort into this. And I guess I'm curious just to start with sort of laying a foundation of like, can you put this in some context and like what used to be the case and what has changed that's like making people so energized right now?
Yeah, it is. It's like the most excited I've ever seen people in robotics. And, you know, I guess as an engineer, there's something like romantic about building machines to do the stuff that we don't want to do. And that's why I've been doing this for so long. First with, you know, a decade on self-driving cars. But for me, even going back to like teenage years doing battle bots and then going to MIT to basically build more robots. But, you know, during that entire spectrum, it's always been this niche thing. And frankly, like robots have never really lived up to their promise. There's always something, they're always overly fragile. Like in a factory environment, we put them in cages. And if things don't line up like within a millimeter, the whole thing doesn't work.
Except the battle bots. Those were good, actually. Now I'm thinking back.
Battle bots were, yeah.
You made them with like the saws and everything?
Ours had like a hydraulic axe, which was pretty cool. But calling these robots is a bit of a stretch. They're basically glorified RC cars.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. With a weapon.
Yeah. So with a weapon. What's different now is, you know, for the first time, you have robots that are powered by, essentially they have all the brains of an LLM built into this robot. And we're controlling them with neural networks instead of classically engineered algorithms. And so the difference was before, if you have a robot that's like in a room like this, even saying like, go to the whiteboard is almost like an impossibly hard computer science problem. It's like, okay, I have to build an exact 3D map of the world, like have a detector that can figure out what a whiteboard is, train it on millions of examples of what whiteboards look like just to be able to do this. And even then the failure rate would be high if you put it in a different room and it doesn't have a map. But now it's almost like cheating. You can take all the common sense that's on the internet and inject it into a robot brain. And so if you're like, where's the whiteboard? It knows instantly.
You like open the ChatGPT, you know, if you open like video, you can like show it anything and it like knows what it is.
Yeah. And so imagine like robots before started with zero knowledge of the world and now like suddenly have this kind of knowledge of the world.
Better than us. Like they can look around a room and see stuff better than we can.
Yeah. And then on the motion side, you used to have a PhD to compute these complex trajectories. You have like 12 joints on a motor or on a robot. How do you get all 12 joints to move in tight coordination to like move an arm to a place? And this is a very difficult and computationally intensive problem. And now we just kind of jump over that whole thing. And now if you have a way to teleoperate a robot or to put it in a simulation, you can just learn how to move all those joints to mimic the human operator or to accomplish, you know, some reward function or to maximize it. And so you can skip that whole computational challenge. And so those two things together basically mean that everything we thought we knew about robotics or like what kind of businesses were good at businesses or bad businesses, all like that slate has been wiped clean.
Yeah.
And so I think you're going to see this Cambrian explosion of different robots for different applications that now suddenly just work. Whereas before they would like really struggle to do the most basic things.
And when you say for different applications, are you saying it won't be terribly generalized? Will it be medium generalized? Like what made you say for different applications or like different environments maybe?
Yeah, I mean, classically, like a lot of robot businesses like try to get really, really narrow, the successful ones. So we're going to focus on this one problem, like factory automation for 3PLs who are putting things in boxes and putting them on a conveyor belt, like very specific. And that's just so you could narrow the problem enough to be good at it. Now, I think you're going to see people broaden the horizons a little bit because it's much, much easier to go from, you know, a piece of dumb hardware to something that's performing a useful task. You know, I say multiple applications too, because it's my view that there's going to be a whole bunch of different shapes and sizes of robots, each optimized for different types of work.
Yep.
You know, as opposed to maybe like a humanoid robot, which, you know, is very, very expensive, but in theory could do everything. I think we're probably going to see some of those, but the vast majority of robots will be more special purpose in nature.
I feel like there was a moment in AI where the researchers who were sort of closest to the work were like very sure it was going to work before the rest of the world sort of knew. Is there an equivalent thing in robotic? Like, have people crossed a similar threshold to like whatever that was at like the pre-ChatGPT moment in robotics where like some people who are at the very front have been working on it for decades are like, this is definitely happening now?
Yeah, if you had like secret microphones in like robotics labs across the country right now, you'd just be hearing holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. It's like constantly happening. And I think finally like the light bulb moments are happening. And it all like in the early days of this stuff, it all looks very rudimentary and kind of simple. But if you know what you're looking at, you see the signs of life that mean over the next 3 to 5, 10, even less years of development, this will go from an interesting technology in a research organization to like, broad mainstream appeal. And yeah, those signs of life are happening. Those light bulb moments are happening all over the place right now.
So what are the components? Like there's obviously, we talked about like there's like vision, there's like the ability for the robot to do like manipulation the right way, for it to have the right sort of dexterity. There's got to be something around like reliability. I don't know about like decision making, if that's its own sort of like, what are the components basically to like this up level?
Yeah, you've touched on a bunch of good ones. Depends on the type of robot. For the ones we're building, like robots that operate in your home, they need to navigate through a home. They need to remember where things are in the home. They need to interact with and manipulate these objects, like you said, and probably have some way of incorporating your user preferences into all of this. And so you've got a reasoning component. Like I see a certain thing in a home, plus I know, the preferences you've told me in the past about how you like things organized or how you run things in your home. And then I'm going to take that and reason about what the next steps I should take as a robot. And then once you have those next steps you're going to take, drive to the oven, put the towel on it, then go over here. Once you have those discrete steps, then you can move to more one of these, end-to-end models that basically given a simple task can go execute it.
My implicit assumption here is that on some time scale, you're like extremely confident this will all work. But like, what are you unsure about in the next, let's say like 5 to 10 years, or like what will drag?
One of the biggest challenges for something like this is a brand new product is like, how do I use it? Like, how does my life change and how do I adapt the way I live to best, make use of a robot like this? And that could be, in a home environment, or maybe it's like a manufacturing business that, its entire workflow is organized around people standing in work cells doing a task and handing things on a conveyor belt. Like, how does all this change? And so I think that the technology part will come pretty fast. And I'm pretty confident in that. The part that I think traditionally takes longer is the world has to adapt to basically, now that this new thing exists, how does everything about how I run my business or how I live in my home or how do I operate my hotel or whatever it is need to change or should change to best make use of this new
it's
thing.
Like, this is like where like AI software is, where like it's obviously much better than like what's currently being deployed and used. It like takes time to get from like the tech is good to now it's like implemented everywhere. So you're basically saying it's like the robots will be good enough at some point soon, but then figuring out how to use them in daily life and like, where does it actually fit into like a life workflow, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think the companies building these technologies have a responsibility to help us figure that out. You know, they're closest to the technology. And I think they need to think not just about like, what does technology building do? Or, what's the fancy new thing I built in there? But like, 3 steps removed from that, how do businesses actually make use of this? And like, what do they need to know about it? And like, what things do you need to build in so that it's as easy as possible to sort of go on this adoption curve and make it happen?
Are you more in a mindset of like, we are Apple and we're going to like, we'll tell you the product kind of, and like, this is how it's going to work and this is what the robot will be? Or is it more of like the YC, like, let's just get it into some homes and iterate type? Like, which mindset do you think you feel closer to?
Well, it's a frustrating answer, but a little bit of both. It's one of those things like strong opinions weakly held. So I think you have to have an opinion. You have to have your taste and your preferences built into the design of a product, or it feels bland. Like a product with no opinions is just like, you wouldn't even notice it. So I think you have to start off with strong opinions and then be willing to put those in people's hands and then quickly abandon them if it's not, if it doesn't work the way you want to. I think if you're not stubborn enough, you end up with a just product no one is interested in. And if you're too stubborn, then you end up with a flop in the market once it's out there. And so, I think it's a careful balance.
Why did you feel compelled to go for the home? Like, you obviously, even with this generalized robot sort of idea, there's a lot of things that you could do that aren't just like pack a box in a warehouse type of thing. That's sort of like more dynamic than that. But like, you picked home for some reason.
Yeah, for some reason. So I just turned 40. This is my third, company that I'm working on.
Heard of the last two.
Big one.
Yeah.
But I bring this up because like at this point in my career, I kind of know how I want to spend my time and like what's important to me. And first of all, I want to have a lot of fun. and working on home robots that I could use, all my friends can use. Like, couldn't think of anything more interesting than that, or more fun, especially compared to like robots that are hidden in a factory that no one would ever see.
Totally.
I also think that, one of the great promises of working on really cool technology is, you certainly get some dopamine hits when you're solving a problem and you make it work. But like 10 times that or 100 times more is when you see your hard work go in someone's hands and they use it for the first time. And they come back to you and say, oh, this is so cool, or my life changed because of this. I remember, one of my favorite stories or examples of this was when we were working on Twitch. And there was this guy who was like a carpet cleaner in Minnesota or something, who started streaming on the side and like had a really popular channel. And he was making, he was like one of the first streamers to make 6 figures just playing video games online. And he's like, this completely changed my life. And so like moments like that, when you build some cool technology, but then it actually like moves the needle for someone and they tell you their stories, that's the really motivating thing for me. And you're just not going to get that, if you don't have millions of people using the product.
I mean, the idea that you could get like a robot in everyone's home is, it's actually totally believable to me. Like, I could see a future, which I guess this is what you're building towards. If it's the right form factor and price point, and it does the right set of things, it seems very believable. And I guess like you probably had some range of considerations where you're like, we could make the smallest possible, cheapest possible thing, all the way up to we could try to make a $50,000 humanoid. And you picked something at some point along that spectrum, trying to be somewhere there. Did you think about it in sort of like a range of like what was technologically possible, what future you thought kind of made the most sense? Like, how'd you pick what sort of like complexity and price point to live along? Because you're not doing humanoid.
From day one, my concern is that there's always going to be an expectation for what the home robot product can deliver and what reality is, especially in the early days. And that expectation versus reality kind of goes into value, how much value you perceive you get from this product. There's a scale. There's like cost on one hand, value on the other. And we want to do everything possible in our favor to tip the scale towards like value. And so that means like being really aggressive on cost to get the price down and make these affordable. That has the dual benefit of, on one hand, making it so that people are delighted by the product, because it's not something they spent as much as a new car on. They spent something much, much less, and they're pleasantly surprised, hopefully. And the other is, if you get the cost low enough, you can sell these to a lot of people, because lots of people can afford them. And at this day and age, data, real world data, is one of the biggest bottlenecks in robotics. And so if you can get lots of robots out there, you're going to have lots of data much sooner, which then creates this feedback loop where the product gets better, and then it's worth more to people, and then more people buy it. There are a lot of trades where you can build a cooler robot or add more capabilities, or you can reduce the cost. And we've almost always been in the reduce the cost kind of thing.
Yeah. Do you think that the humanoid vision, which is obviously extremely sci-fi and cool, like, does it make sense? Obviously, you could build a robot a bunch of ways. And like one way you could choose to do it is just like shape it like a person, but it's a robot. Maybe there's some reason for it. But like when you think about like the humanoid question, like, does it intuitively make sense as something that like ought to exist, or is it kind of random?
First of all, when I see the videos of humanoid robots these days, having worked in the field for a long time, it is just so cool. It's so amazing to see what people are able to come up with these days, and how fluid the movement looks, and how dexterous they're getting in terms of the things that they can do. And so I think they're amazing machines, and I think they need to exist in the world. I think the question for me is, if we're talking about putting these robots to work, or like people owning them, the question is like, at the end of the day, is this the most cost-effective way to deliver the most value I can, to that customer or to that person? And I think for humanoids, there are very few uses for which the answer is yes. Most of the time, the answer is no, I can build a simpler machine that works in this environment. If it's a factory thing where the floors are all flat and you're just moving things from one place to another, that robot should probably have wheels.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a home environment and, like a humanoid presents all these safety issues, like with walking upstairs, if it slips on a banana peel and falls, it becomes a, ballistic missile basically going down your stairs. Right. These are not good things for the home. That's
true, actually. Like a big, heavy robot falling down your stairs is a huge problem.
Yeah. So for the home, you probably want to optimize more on like low mass, low cost, and try to maximize what you can do, but, not running into some of the challenges of a humanoid. That said, like there are some things that'd be really hard for a non-humanoid robot to accomplish. Like if you're on a construction site and you're climbing up and down ladders and using hand tools designed for humans and all these things, mm-hmm. I buy that argument that there are some uses where we'll want humanoids. But I think it is currently, I think people advertising humanoids are trying to get hype in the space, get more investment in the space, which we need. But I think the actual practical uses of them, it will be a little bit smaller than what is being portrayed currently.
It also could make sense that they don't make the most sense in a home, but they live other places. Like it would be good, for example, if like a lot of like defense was carried out by machines, like because that could in some world, hopefully that could like save lives, for example, or like you could imagine it sort of like, guarding at like, a stadium or like taking care of like, big sort of like patrol areas and things like that. So I could see that because it is like a very mobile thing. In the home, that example that you just gave, it slips and it falls on the stairs and it, hurts a kid or an animal or something like that.
I mean, maybe in the distant future, we can solve these problems. I think just near term, you're less likely to see them in the home first.
Along that curve, though, between now and, of course, 50 years out, like obviously these things are going to be, I think it's like cars where it like gets safer than people, one day, I assume. But on the way up, what's the regulation going to be like for robotics? Like, do you need to be like really involved with the government to like put these robots in a home, or is part of what you're doing with the design like to avoid a lot of that stuff?
Right now, it's very, very different than some of the industries I've worked in, or defense things or automotive things, where they're very, very heavily regulated industries, and for good reason. I think you're going to see a lot of products in the home, and it depends on your view. On one hand, we have these little robot vacuums going around today. You could make an argument that this is kind of just a step up from that. But you don't see for consumer products a whole lot of targeted regulations for individual products. We have general product liability laws and other things that are generally applicable to everything from chainsaws to blenders or other things that you might have in your home that carry some risk associated with them. But I think there's an immense responsibility on the developers of these products to try to make them safe and to do everything possible following best practices, regardless of whether or not there's regulation. One thing that we may see more of is looking at how the data is used from these products, the security of these products. I think that's really important. Obviously, like the home is one of the most intimate spaces in your life. There needs to be a great degree of trust and responsibility that goes with the companies who are, have these machines that are likely covered with cameras, running around our homes.
Yeah.
And most of us don't even think about today, like when we buy a robot vacuum, where does it come from? Like, who is the company behind it? Are they trustworthy? Are they going to do the right thing in my home?
Yeah.
And that's where I'd like to see a lot more scrutiny.
So what does that mean you're going to need to do? Because you're right. It's like, I remember, people got comfortable with it at some point, but like the Alexa problem where there's like a microphone in your home. You're like, now there's like a microphone and a camera and like whatever else in your home. So like, what does that mean you need as like a company to sort of be, a trusted brand there? Like you have to go from day one pretty hard at that, I guess.
Yeah. You have to have some principles and opinions and be able to talk about it publicly, I think. But, all these products are going to, every new category of product like this goes through weird snafus in the early days. When you mentioned Alexa, I was thinking to mind when those first came out, wasn't there something where there's like a TV commercial that came on and said, "Hey Alexa, something something," and then like across the United States, like thousands of people bought toilet paper.
That's crazy.
And then recently with the Meta glasses, Zuckerberg was on stage and he said something, and all the people in the audience, their device pinged the server at the same time, and the demo failed. So there's going to be these weird moments and things that that come along in the early days. But anyways, on the data side, for us, we have like two things we care about. One is transparency. So if there's data being collected in your home, like what was it? I want to be able to know that what that data was and what's going from the robot to anywhere else. And the second is control. If this product is in your home, you own it. You need to have the on-off switch and be able to control what that data is used for.
Yeah.
And I think if you have those two things, and you are principled about those things and hold true to them, and basically fulfill your promises, and you give the control to the user, I think that's the best, sort of starting position for something like this, is just establish those principles up front.
One last question on robotics, and we can go to another topic. AI models behind robotics. How distinct is the concept of like robotics AI versus like other AI?
So, there's a lot of similarities, and I think in a way, like LLMs that started off as like chatbots that exist purely in the text world, and robots, which are like physical machines, very multimodal in nature, you can see these things kind of converging because the latest models are multimodal. They can take in audio, images, other things in the same way that your robot is expecting that. And so over time, I think they're converging a little bit. And in fact, a lot of the training approaches, pre-training, post-training, those concepts exist in the robotics world. However, there's still a lot of things that are unique to robotics that you would never do if you're working purely on an LLM. And that's a lot, basically like mixing in real world data, different ways of collecting it, different ways of using simulation, and figuring out how to tie that to all the intelligence that's embedded in like a modern LLM.
And then the data is like super important here, obviously.
Data is important today. I think this is like a now problem. If you look at LLMs, I think the reason that you can see so many different companies, like 20 different companies all building foundational models and get within a stone's throw of each other in terms of performance, small teams, large teams, whatever it is because essentially they're all starting from the same data set, which is the internet and everything that can be downloaded from it. And, that data kind of determines the quality of the model that you can get. And there's certainly some alpha on top of that from individual teams. But in the robotics world, there's no corpus of data like the internet that exists. There isn't an entire internet of point clouds or camera images of, robots manipulating objects. And so right now we're in this early days where you've got to either bootstrap that data yourself, you've got to pay people to collect it for you, or you've got to try to interpret, or generate robot data from other things like watching YouTube videos and trying to infer from hand motions how a robot should do the same thing. And so we're just kind of in the early days of that for robotics.
Do you think there should be like a scale AI for robotics data, or will it be that a company like yours just generates its own data and gets smarter as a result of that?
I don't know. I think there'll probably be both. In fact, I've probably talked to at least a dozen companies who want to be the scale AI for robotics. And I think that there's going to be plenty of customers for that in the near term, especially as this data void exists. But when that starts to be filled and we start to see useful robots in the world, I do think the majority of data collection will come from robots and less from people getting data.
I would
also
think that for your product, for example, any data set that is not your products in the wild is going to be approximating the data. And the perfect data set, I would imagine, would be if you had armies of robots out in homes giving you data.
If your technology is sufficiently advanced that you can do transfer learning from other forms of data, other robots, YouTube videos, whatever it is, any source of data, and you can use that to train your robot, that's like an advantage because you don't, that total size of that data set may be much larger than just the data set that would be collected on your specific robots. However, where we are today, it's much easier to get robots to do amazing things if the data collected came from the exact robot that you're trying to deploy a model on.
Totally. Yeah.
And we'll see if that changes over time.
Yeah, makes sense. So we alluded to this before, but you obviously started Twitch, you started Cruise, you're doing it again. First of all, why are you so motivated to keep doing these hard companies? And so like many people after this much success wouldn't go back to the beginning. And you've had two really successful companies, which I want to talk about, particularly Cruise, because I think it's related. But I guess to get started, like what's driving you now to do this again?
I mean, I had, a very, very short-lived existential crisis after Cruise. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm done with this company. This is like, practically my identity for a full decade. What next? I spent some time thinking about that. There's, you could retire, you could become a venture capitalist.
Which is kind of like,
are those the same thing? I think. I don't know. No, just kidding. Yeah.
We work super hard.
And then after thinking about that for a while, I realized like the thing that, outside of spending time with my family and friends, the thing that brings me the most joy is solving really hard problems with really smart people. And so like that is retirement for me. That's like the most fun, satisfying thing that I could possibly think of to do. And it also ends up being you can do more of that and do it at a larger scale if you work with like a big team of people and you do it in the form of a company as opposed to a hobby or something that you're doing it on your own. And so to me, I think there's no better thing. And maybe at some point I'll run out of energy to go hard like I am right now. But for now, like this is great. We have a brilliant team. We're going on this, building this exciting new product in a big market. And that is energizing to me.
I want to talk about a couple of the things that you've said about how you want to build it this time. One that stuck out to me was that you never want to be more than 100 people.
Yeah.
And first of all, I actually didn't know, is that like literal or is that directional?
To be seen.
Okay.
Yeah. I think right now we're taking it very seriously. So if that is actually your belief, we can talk about why, but if that's actually your belief, then you make very different hiring decisions. It's like, well, if I think about the future company having 100 people in it, I can allocate this many people to this type of role. That means every person in every seat has to be the best in the world at this for the company to be successful. And so you end up, passing on a lot of people that are great people, really talented, but they're not at that specific level we want for that particular role. And I think, if you're successful in doing that, you end up with this, there needs to be a name for it. But like in the early days of a startup, when everyone is like on the same page, like maybe just the founders, they're all in it 110%. They're all usually like brilliant, working together. They're like almost mind melded. And then you have like insane productivity for some period of time until you get bogged down by the organization growing and adding more functions and, teams of people and management layers and all this kind of stuff.
Disconnected. You have communication issues.
Yeah. And so you get this drift away from this like pure like force of energy that is in the beginning stage of a company. And so the reason for trying to have a cap on the size of the company is to keep it so that we're always in that pure high output zone. And you can't get that if you have like too much of a range of people in the company. I really think of it more like a pro sports team. Like you're not going to have, the Lakers. I think you're going to have like LeBron James and a bunch of high school kids on the team. It's like they're all players that are the best in the world, so that, when they work together as a team, they can outperform a team that is like a mix of talents.
I also think like if you have like the LeBrons with the high school players, like the LeBrons are like, what are we doing here? And
yeah, exactly. They don't want to stay. They want to go play with the best people in the world against the best people in the world. Yeah. And that's how you get better and grow. And people who are the best in the world at what they do typically got there because they have this growth mindset that constantly want to get better. And what better way to do that than to surround yourself with people of different skill sets that are all the best in the world at what they do and sort of absorb from that.
I feel like so much of what gets hard is as you start getting into like scaling operations and you get into like that side of things, it just gets so hard to keep it really small. Like even you think about like, let's say you only had like 10 non-engineering roles. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, someone's got to run finance. They probably can't do it alone. You've got like, you're going to have all these like physical parts. You're going to have buildings for things like, so how do you think you'll actually try to keep a limit on that? Like, will you partner? Do you go sort of like work with people outsource? Or do you actually think that like, maybe with like new AI tooling, you could just go way further with people and it's just sort of like a demand you'll place?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's part of why I said to be seen. Yeah. Like this is a great mental model now, and it may not.
No, I think it's a great push. And by the way, I think one of the healthiest changes I feel like I've seen from 5 years ago is the shift from thinking that like big teams are cool to thinking big teams are lame.
Yeah. I mean, things seem to ebb and flow, right? Like I'm taking the extreme position here, but I do think if that has the effect of, causing a small shift in that direction, that's probably net good for the industry and good for these companies. So it'd be a question for us. Do we partner or outsource things? I think keeping the team small also forces you to focus on like, what are our core competencies, the things that we need to do uniquely because we think we can actually do them better than any other company that we could potentially work with. And, for things like a lot of operations or facilities or, buildings, these are things where maybe we have no reason to think we would be the best in the world at this. So we should partner. And a lot of companies, like they have lots of funding, they have lots of teams, like it's almost like they take on these responsibilities because they can, not necessarily because they should.
I feel like one of the most important things, which I think you've obviously shipped in self-driving in a way that like, very few have, but I think in a lot of these sort of more sci-fi areas, it's very easy to not be in like shipping mindset. And like, I think you did this really well at Cruise. Obviously like OpenAI was doing this like well before ChatGPT. And so you basically probably are in a mindset, I assume, of figuring out like how quickly can we ship and like iterate. And like, that's got to be the mindset rather than just like hang in a warehouse building the perfect robot forever.
I think for that, it's starting with the thing you want to build and then working back to what is the constraint? What are the constraints or bottlenecks that we need to make our number one priority because it cannot go faster than, what that one bottleneck or constraint would dictate. And for self-driving, that's a combination of safety, trust, and public acceptance. And so, those are different work streams where basically like, unless those are all green, you don't have a product. It doesn't matter how good the technology is. And there are similar things, for a home robot or really any business. And so like, mapping out what those are and basically making that the company's top priority, like at, Cruise, for example, safety metrics were the single thing we talked about every week over week, making progress towards those. And I think for any company, like what you talk about, what you design your metrics around kind of sets the tone for the company. And it's got to be aligned with that, whatever the constraints are.
What do you think you can do in a home first? Like, what do you think will be the first activity that can like really be done well in a home? And then like, what are the things that you think are close, but maybe follow in the, next 12 to 24 months or something?
Yeah. I mean, there are hierarchies, I think, of tasks for a home robot. And if you look at, I think like a classic 2x2 grid, I guess one is maybe the technical complexity of the task, like how hard is it to get a robot to do this successfully? And then the second is like, what is the success rate that is acceptable to a customer of a product like this? And I'll give you an example. If you are, in the easy side of things from the technical capability and also the very forgiving side of things in terms of success rate is probably like picking up your kids' toys. So I have, 2 kids. A 1-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they're between the two of them are constantly making messes, and toys are all over the house, kind of running around picking up toys.
Same.
And so, if you have a product that you can buy, you can go to the store, buy this thing, put it in your house, push a button, turn it on, and then when you're gone for the day, all the toys are magically put away by the time you get home. It's like a mind-blowing experience. And let's say it screws up, and like 2 out of the 100 toys are still on the floor when you get home.
That's okay.
Doesn't skip a beat.
Better. Yeah.
So that like think about nines of reliability for engineering. Like maybe 1 9 is fine for that particular task. There are other things like putting a wine glass in a dishwasher where the technical complexity is a little higher and the
What's hard about that, by the way? Is it like grabbing, or is it?
Yeah.
Like,
So if you think about picking up objects, this microphone, which is going to make a noise when I squish it, is compliant. And so if I'm off a little bit on where I grip it or like how much I squeeze it, I'm not going to shatter this microphone into a million pieces.
Yeah.
For a wine glass, the margin is very thin. And so from a dexterity standpoint, it's a little more fragile.
actually, sometimes I think about that's like a good example of a thing where I'm like, it's amazing that people can do certain things, like squeeze a wine glass the right amount, or like hit, a ball, with a racket or a golf club with the right angle or something like that, or like catch something that's flying while you're moving. Like, it's actually pretty crazy what you can do, like, mechanically.
It is. And the evolution to how we get there is interesting too. Because my 1-year-old daughter, her hands are like open, close. There's nothing in between.
Yeah.
She grabs objects.
The wine
right?
glass is shattering.
And at some point along the way, we developed much more nuanced skills and abilities. But so wine glass is another one. The other thing is challenging is if you're putting a wine glass on a rack and it's a thin stem or something, and you nick, you like bump into something, you might break the stem off, right? And so not only is it more difficult from a technical standpoint, but if you shatter a wine glass in someone's dishwasher, they're probably not going to be your customer anymore.
That's right.
And so that's
Not a
like
dishwasher's
maybe
busted.
need several nines of reliability. And so I think that this sort of spectrum of technical difficulty and basically forgivability is going to dictate the types of things you see home robots do first. And I think we'll work our way up towards, I think the holy grail of a home robot, which is like dishes, laundry, end to end, maybe cooking. These things, all of them have like all of these little, it's like a minefield. You do one thing wrong and you ruin the whole process. Like for laundry, if you put the red sock in with the whites, have pink laundry, that's like game over, right? And it's, so there's things like that. For cooking, it's the same thing. You put too much salt or pepper in there and the dish is ruined. So these are things that I think we'll get to, and I think it'll happen pretty quick. But, I think...
You think it's like cooking a steak at some point?
Yeah, why not? If you think about, at the end of the day, you have pick and place and simple manipulation. That's what cooking is.
Yeah.
They're just like a much higher degree of reliability. And there's other things around food safety and bacteria and other things that come in cooking and temperature sensing and what like that. So it's all doable. It's just like,
Do you think at some point it's like, hey, robot, I'm at work right now. There's a steak in the fridge. Please cook it and clean up everything. By the time, like 15 years from now, that's doable.
Less than 5.
Less than 5?
Yeah. This stuff is going fast. Again, if you look at the robots you can buy today in the world, like the nice robot vacuums, you may not think that. If you see what's happening behind closed doors at the best robotics companies in the world, you might think that. And if you're the leadership of these companies, the technical leadership, and you kind of know where things are going, you absolutely believe that.
The hand seems really, as we're talking about this, I was sort of like stupidly like, I was like, actually a hand's pretty good. Like your fingers are like pliable. You have like a lot of degrees of freedom. You have like multiple grip points. Is the hand the optimal thing?
The hand is really important to get right because it is the robot's interface to every object that it interacts with. If you make it too simplistic or not enough sensing capabilities or whatever, then you have to have a much, much smarter brain to figure out how to use this primitive tool to accomplish a complicated task. And so the more mechanical complexity or capability that you add to a hand, the more sensing ability. In theory, it would require less, sort of rocket science to figure out how to do a task with that hand. The trade, of course, is the more technology, the more degrees of freedom or motors that you pack into a hand, the more complicated it becomes, which impacts durability and also cost.
Yeah.
And so there's push and pull there to find that sweet spot where you can basically come up with the simplest hand possible to do the task you want to do at the lowest cost, while also being able to accomplish everything in a fairly straightforward manner. But I think in the limit, there's a lot of, we think by analogy a lot, and we have 2 hands and 2 arms. And so like a lot of the robots you see today have 2 hands and 2 arms, but it is a really interesting thought experiment. Like what does the ultimate hand arm thing look like? And I think it was Rodney Brooks who said this the other day, but I actually do kind of think maybe it ends up being some crazy octopus tentacle looking thing in the future that's like very adaptable and can reach into small spaces.
Interesting.
Well, I think that, the human hand ended up where we are due to probably some impossible to unravel sequence of evolutional pressures, right?
Well, it's like you start down some path and then you do your best, evolution does its best given some somewhat random starting point, I suppose, right?
Yeah. So if you could go back like a million years and hit the reset button on human evolution,
you
like maybe a new
yeah.
fork would emerge and it would be more tentacle-like or who knows what. But I am skeptical that the way that human hands and arms evolved is the ultimate. And so the challenge will be like, can we figure out what that is?
I have a couple stupid questions about the robot at home. One is, how strong could it be? Like, is a 100-pound robot like, it must be ridiculously stronger than a person, right?
I would think for a 100-pound robot, you could certainly make it maybe stronger in some dimensions. There are some things that like our sort of soft biological muscles are pretty good at.
Or stronger than like a physical robot pound for pound kind of thing?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. I think so. I think probably the state of the art Boston Dynamics robot seems like it's on par, if not, more capable than a human. And if not now, I'm sure the next couple generations will be. So that's kind of interesting.
That's surprising that a soft muscle is stronger than like, I don't know why I would think a robot could be dramatically stronger.
Yeah, I've been going down the rabbit hole on this a little bit, thinking about like, as again, our focus on affordability and cost, like is a electromagnetic gear motor where you've got a magnets and copper winding and a bunch of gears in a housing, is that the most cost-effective, durable way to generate motion for a robot? And the answer in the short term is probably yes. But I think there are some interesting things happening where we're trying to mimic either some of the chemical processes or electrostatic actuators or other things that are similar in how they work to like a human muscle. And the benefit there is you can get a higher cycle count, more silent operation, and potentially more power density, like how much strength can you get into a physical volume than what we have today in gear motors, and then potentially much, much beyond what humans have in our muscles.
Isn't like hydraulic is pretty strong, like hydraulic pressure is pretty strong?
Hydraulics can be extremely powerful, but they have other trades, typically noisy. The valves and things are pretty expensive, can be harder to control and get, high fidelity motion. And so in terms of power density, maybe good, but there are other trades and the reasons you don't see these on a lot of robots.
That makes sense. Another question I had that's sort of like probably off spec, but while we're talking, is this going to be something that would have like home security applications as well? Or does that then take you into weird territory that's just not worth going to?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the challenges with a home robot is it's kind of general purpose. And so like, what are people going to use this thing for? And I think it's hard if you just have a laundry list of 50 different items that the thing can do, and security is one of them. But I do think a lot of people will be out and about and with their home robot at home be like, oh, I wonder if I forgot to turn off the gas on the stove, and send the robot over there to just, tell you, or even take it on for yourself. In the same way, you could be like, hey, robot, like, if you see any person in my home or any doors open, like, let me know.
Yeah, if you see me getting burglarized, like do something.
But I don't know if you will think of it as a security robot so much as like, this is just one of the many responsibilities of my home robot is to keep tabs on my home.
Totally. Alerting probably is good. Taking actions probably not.
I hadn't thought about that side of that. That's not really in our.
That's good. That makes sense. I'm just thinking because like, in my head, I'm like, okay, if there's this brilliant, capable robot in the house, my guess is you're going to have a lot of people want it to start doing a ridiculous number of things for them. Would be the arc of time. And then you'll have to choose from that set, like what goes in. Yeah,
I think so. But for sure. I mean, on the security side, I would hope though, rather than having like physical deterrence and like, having your home robot turn into a security guard with a baton or something, it's more so that it just becomes unattractive to rob homes or do, break in and enter into a home. Maybe in the same way that, a world full of cars where everyone has like that Tesla Sentry mode. Yeah. There's very little incentive to break into cars. It's not worth the risk.
Well, I mean, even like a security system just makes a loud sound and calls the police.
I think that's pretty effective.
I think it's extremely effective. Yeah. And I think those systems are pretty old and like, they're deeply embedded but
it's like you may figure out how to disable the alarm and sneak into the house, but if there's a robot, rolling around, like,
and then a siren's blaring and all that stuff. I just think it'll be interesting where if this gets in there, my guess is people will I could see a future where people expect a ridiculous amount from these things.
Well, I mean, it touched on something interesting I've thought about is like when you ask people, or we ask people, what would you do with a home robot? Immediately what comes to mind is like the thing that's most annoying to you today to do in your home. And I think that's good. We want to help with the annoying stuff. And
what comes up most, like laundry probably?
Yeah, laundry, dishes, picking up after my kids, wiping surfaces, cleaning. Like these are the things you would expect. Yeah. And so we're going to chip away at those things for sure. But what I also like to think about is the things that we don't do because we value our time more than that. The example is if you ever gone to like a really nice hotel, the slippers are laid out for you. There's a glass of water on the nightstand, a little chocolate on the pillow, all these like little flourishes. Nice. Like, I don't know. I think that, robots should not only automate the things that we don't want to do, but also like elevate our standard of living to some degree.
Yeah.
And so I love the idea that if you can afford a really affordable home robot, we're going to give you a lifestyle that, would otherwise be inaccessible to you.
Totally. I mean, that's actually a really interesting point that like, a lot of the types of things you're talking about don't require any new inputs. It's just about taking care of your home in a certain way that's like beyond what you would normally need. But it's like you've got a bunch of towels that are like sitting in the laundry room that are clean, but can you like put those by, the shower and like roll them up nicely?
Yeah, and maybe you don't need all these things, but the point is like, your time is more valuable than that. It's very scarce. Like humanity's time, I think, is really important. But for a robot that's got 24 hours to sit around in your home and like try to make your life better, what could we come up with for it to do? What could it come up with to do for you? That's an interesting question.
Wow. I'm curious about reflecting on what you've learned from the way self-driving cars played out and how it might matter here. Maybe one interesting sort of case study is, the Tesla versus Waymo approaches. Do you think in any way that how that played out, or any learnings there that poured over to like what could, be impactful in the robotics land?
Well, it's hard to say that, very different approaches to getting to market, but it does seem like they're both trying to converge at the same thing, which is, self-driving cars everywhere. I think one thing that was really brilliant about Tesla's approach, they found a way to sell the product essentially before it was fully complete, if we're looking purely at the self-driving side, and generate billions of dollars of cash flow, which they could use to bolster their core business, but also continue to invest in R&D to make this self-driving product. Waymo, by comparison, has taken almost a couple decades at this point, maybe not quite that long, and probably tens of billions of dollars of investment. And the revenue relative to that has been fairly meager, right?
Yeah.
Compared to that total investment over time, which basically means that the only companies in the world who can do this are the ones with that kind of capital on their balance sheet to basically fund this crazy amount of R&D year over year.
Yeah.
And I think it's no coincidence that the only companies who succeeded in that approach or are on track to succeed in that approach are owned by, Amazon, Google, or like a major car company. And that was even a struggle for a company like General Motors. And so in the home robot space, I hope we don't repeat that. I hope it doesn't become the case that the only companies that make it are ones that are basically kept alive through billions or tens of billions of dollars from, a corporate benefactor. And instead we can find clever ways to get to market that...
Which I guess is why you need to get to market and be selling something along the way to fund all of this.
Well, I think if your development cycle means you don't get to meaningful revenue for 5 to 10 years after the company has started,
you'll have to get acquired.
It means you're entirely dependent on either being acquired or the capital markets, being pointed in the right direction. Yeah. And, historically things tend to cycle back and forth. In a 5 to 10 year timeline, you're getting awfully close to almost guaranteeing that you straddle like a down cycle as well as an up one. And that can be the killer for these companies.
We don't need to talk about sort of Cruise and GM too much, but I am curious about sort of, I saw you share on Cheeky Pint about like not wanting to sell. And I'm just curious, like your mindset about the sense of autonomy and how you think about selling a company since you've been through it, a couple times and everything.
I think, and I said this before, but my conclusion is like, if you are selling a company, it should be because the reason you started the company or the thesis that you had in mind or the thing you wanted to build, something has changed. And maybe like you're no longer interested in it, your life circumstances have changed or whatever. But I think it is a fantasy to believe that you can sell your company, like have your cake and eat it too. Like sell your company
in order to further the mission.
And further the mission. I think in theory, this can happen sometimes, but it is so rare.
It is rare.
And I think more likely than not, you'd be disappointed with that outcome. And therefore, like for me, I can't imagine being in a situation where I would trade, the opportunity to build this amazing thing and control it and make sure it, happens in the way that I want it to, for some kind of partnership or liquidity. So that just doesn't make sense to me. Maybe not for everyone. And maybe that's just because I'm so excited about this thing and bringing this new idea of a home robot into the world that like it just wouldn't even cross my mind the thought of like handing over the reins to someone else.
Yeah, you're also at a point now where like this type of company is such a forever project, and like you're now able to start a company that's like, it is not some little thing. Like if this works, it's just such an important thing, which also I guess that probably also drives you to want to sort of hold on to it indefinitely.
Yeah, perhaps. But I think I'm not selfish about it. Like if I feel like I have an obligation to stay true to, our investors, the employees, and the mission. So, even though I certainly want to hold on to this, I'm not treating it like a pet project. I actually do want to like fulfill this broader vision that we all share.
Yeah. Maybe as a final thing to touch on, you did this crazy like marathon around the world experience. What was that? And like, why'd you do something that seemed so, hard?
Deep in the middle of Cruise, I think I was frankly like kind of frustrated that like we were putting in all this energy, and sometimes there would just be periods where the metrics wouldn't always go up and to the right. We'd take a regression and then go back and forth. And so, the result wasn't always proportionate to the energy going in. And for running, for me at least, that was not the case. You put in the time, you get better. Yeah. And so that's very deterministic and satisfying. And so I needed something to balance that, I feel like, in my life. And as I do, I went down a rabbit hole reading about like extreme marathons that you can do. I was like sort of an amateur marathon runner and came across the World Marathon Challenge. It's this thing you can sign up for. They take you to each continent, one continent per day, and you run a marathon on each one. And then like the next day you fly to the next continent. I thought that is insane. And then in fine print on the website, it's like the world record is like 5 days and 10 hours by this one guy. And then I got the wheels turning. It's like, well, I wonder what the theoretical engineer brain clicks on. I wonder what the fastest theoretical time you could do is if you optimize it's like the traveling salesman
What part
problem.
of the continent?
Like, yeah, where you land, optimize for customs, in and out, and logistics, and like really dial it up to 11. And that turned into an 18-month obsession, got stuck in my head. And I ended up writing some software to find the shortest route between the 7 continents.
That's crazy.
My
problem is that I couldn't run a half marathon. That's where I would struggle.
This sort of stubbornness and attachment to this idea meant that part of this was I had to train my body physically to be able to do this.
Because like you're running a marathon and then you're not resting afterwards.
Yeah. So the cycle, for example, is, you start in Cape Town so that you fly to Antarctica. You have to start there because the weather is so unpredictable.
Oh yeah, the Antarctica one, that's tough.
You need like at least call it a 6-hour window of decent weather. And you're like looking at the weather forecast. When it clears, then you fly in and you land, you run the marathon, and you get out, because that can throw off the...
Where in Antarctica do you do this?
On like the most temperate outer part of Antarctica. So it's on the continent, but we're not talking like South Pole.
Yeah.
It's cold, but it's not like...
But it's not snowy?
I mean, it's icy, and you can't say... It's like barren, all ice. And you land the plane on ice, you run on ice.
You're running on ice?
On ice. It's like kind of like crunchy ice. Like there's like a ski slope groomer that did a course down there. And it's like a 6-mile loop or something. And so it was like running on... it was like trail running.
Got it.
It's still pretty crazy.
That's crazy.
Anyways, yeah. So organizing the logistics for the training my body and everything, doing it in the end, ended up doing this in about 3.5 days, which blew the world record aside. And then after 18 months doing this and finishing it, I got to say, like, it was, you ever like finish the last item on your to-do list and it's just like a dopamine hit and you're like, oh, that feels so great.
Yeah.
That's what it was. It was like relief. It's like, check the box. Now my tormented brain, which wouldn't let this go for 18 months, can finally relax.
Where do you go? Cape Town, Antarctica, South America?
Yeah, southern tip of South America, and then to Panama City, and then I think to Madrid, and then Oman. And
you're just like, by the last one, are you just crazy fried, or were you in shape to just not be, so beaten down?
I was pretty fried.
Yeah.
But it's like, the training I did peaked at doing 3 marathons within a 24-hour period in 3 different cities. That was like the stress test for this, if you will. And my coach was like, I was like, only 3 marathons, that's not 7. Like, is that actually the right amount of training? And he said, I promise you, when you're doing the real thing and you have this whole crew of people with you and everything is on the line and the adrenaline going, if you can do 3 in 24 hours, you can do the rest. And he was right.
That's wild. That's like the hardest physical task imaginable.
Mental toughness is important for startups. And I feel like it really helped me quite a bit in that domain.
Yeah, totally. All right, Kyle, this was really fun. Thanks for making time for it.
Thank you.